It is bad to think of music in the same terms as politics, as a struggle between parties or factions. Thinking of experimental musicians as a minority, for instance, is just as bad as thinking of Jews or Negroes as a minority. It makes us want to expand our empire to our own infinite unhappiness. It makes us cling to our distinguishing features. It makes us feel small. One function of music is to arrest time. It lets us appreciate the eternal in the blink of an eye. It tunes us in to the radiance of creation. To crystallize my own situation, alone in the studio, the microphone in front of me, reading, reiterating the thoughts of a few weeks ago, I will now perform a composition by Michael Chant.
If you believe that something is God, and then it turns out they're not God, then the only thing they can be then is the devil. If a God lets you down, the God that failed, then usually that becomes something, it turns into its opposite.
The Great Digest, paragraph 2, is a composition for an unlimited number of singers and drummers. Today's performance was recorded by the Scratch Orchestra. In a way, this piece was instrumental in the original formation of the Scratch Orchestra. For the first performance in the Roundhouse in May 1969, I and about 20 friends had learnt the rhythms and melodies required in the piece. Shortly before the performance, we realized that we were a force inadequate to fill the space with sound in the way that the piece demands. So each of us, and prominent amongst these friends were a few engaged in part-time teaching, John Tilbury, Gavin Bryars, Michael Parsons, as well as many gifted composers such as Howard Skempton, Michael Chant, Christopher Hobbs, Hugh Shrapnel. Each one of us set about recruiting friends, family, and students to swell the ranks. This larger gathering was the beginning of the Scratch Orchestra, and the composition of the remaining paragraphs of the Great Digest has been pretty much tied up with this orchestra. Particularly paragraph 5, which in a way is my view of the composition of the orchestra as it now exists, with its high level of differentiation of actions and functions. Paragraph 2, on the other hand, is long and undifferentiated. Michael Parsons gave me an illuminating reference for the piece. He says that Buddhist monks go to a waterfall to practice chanting. The waterfall can't be drowned, but it inspires the voice to high levels of power and quality. In this piece, the voices fight a losing battle with the sound of the drums. Occasionally, a voice may seem equal to the situation, but due to the long duration of the piece, they increasingly prove inadequate. Singers may justifiably feel proud of surviving the piece to the end, but in my own experience of singing the piece, I come away feeling drained and exhausted. I've given everything I've got, and it has not proved adequate. I have failed. Know the point of rest, and then have an orderly mode of procedure. Having this orderly procedure, one can grasp the azure, that is, take hold of a clear concept. Holding a clear concept, one can be at peace internally. Being thus calm, one can keep one's head in moments of danger. He who can keep his head in the presence of the tiger is qualified to come to his deed in due hour.
Like the way one watches with affection the way people grow, so one cares for one's youth, tries to make them flower, looking into one's own heart. That you could say is not denying one's own experience, coming to rest, being at ease in perfect equity. I mean, you could say that that is a kind of medievalist concept in the sense of stillness and being without motion and so on. But at the same time, like the spirit in which I think we generally took it is this idea of opposing all the hysteria and commercial culture and retrogression.
It was okay while it lasted. I'd satisfied my curiosity. I'd been to all the classes. I could see that I wasn't as good at singing and drumming as the next person. In fact, in one class, Cornelius picked me out and said, "You're not singing properly," to me. And I don't think I ever managed to sing again after that, because that criticism kind of cut me to the quick.
Nobody had thought of the idea of actually bringing in amateurs and making serious music with them. If you brought them in, it would be only to, as it were, to use them in some way. Cornelius, it wasn't using them; it was encouraging them, giving them permission to make music, to giving them permission and encouraging them to make their own music, which they would never have believed they could do.
Scratch music. Each member of the orchestra provides himself with a notebook, or scratch book, in which he notates a number of accompaniments performable continuously for indefinite periods.
Then came reception. The task of disentangling 5 minutes of musique concrète from the cobwebs of atmospherics that were a steady feature of radio reception before VHF. Yes, such a task requires patience and dedication. A psychoanalyst could probably trace how a present-day live Scratch Orchestra performance is descended from that situation. The two experiences have two main features in common. First, the thing you want to hear is incredibly distant and delicate and pure, though you have to remain absolutely quiet and still and concentrated to receive even a whiff of it. And second, between you and it, random storms and dramas on an immense scale flash and rage incessantly in their attempt to distract you. Often you wonder whether you are tuned to the correct wavelength. You wonder whether the broadcast has been cancelled or postponed.
My scratch book was a copy of the Radio Times. I just used to interpret. I still have it in it's a particular edition of the Radio Times. Not particularly, I thought, oh, I'll have that as my scratch book. Never wrote in it, never did anything to it, just got it out from time to time when I needed to. But my scratch music was always found, really.
I used to do a lot of, not embroidery, weaving and beadwork. And you have to make diagrams with those symbols around circles and stripes and things on squared paper. And I used to use some of them as pieces of music as well. because they just seemed to be playable as well as makeable.
It was all very much conceptual music, but things like an amoeba ingesting a quaver, a cattle truck running along musical stave lines.
As I say, we started off with this sort of unspoken free improvisation. As you entered the room, you would start playing something. And I think, once again, this was an early example of the need to apply discipline, that rather than simply free improvise, it was suggested, almost certainly by Cardew, that we keep these books of scratch music so that you were at least nominally playing something rather than playing nothing. In the early days when it was just me, I was bringing in verbal scars to talk about the best way to express yourself in such a way that one left no loopholes in the instructions.
No, scratch music always remained very fluid and it never sort of solidified into anything which had a style of any kind, but perhaps because it never had the opportunity to develop, it remained full of promise.
But I think what was important was a question of interaction and collective improvisation, the question of the development of the verbal text score.
That was never defined. I mean, Cornelius Cardew never said what scratch music was. It was never defined. It was something we did. It evolved during the course of Scratch Orchestra playing, performing. Scratch music was what the Scratch Orchestra was, really.
Yes, I think in a way the non-musicians were freer and less circumscribed. The musicians tended to think in terms of purely of sound, whereas the non-musicians would think of some kind of performance act in which sound would be a part.
The Scratch Orchestra is a microcosm of such a hypothetical condition. Some observers report that nothing is happening. Others see undifferentiated chaos. Some see it as a bonfire on which all they hold sacred goes up in flames. Others see it as upholding threatened traditions of music making.
Two, popular classics. Popular classics. Only such works as are familiar to several members are eligible for this category. Articles are selected works from the canon in the appendix. Page of the score, a page or more of requires to be revised, a page of an arrangement, a thematic analysis, a gramophone record, etc.
In my profession, I work hard without ever stop. I find this blinking ladder hill, I get back to the top. The looking right, you look his mind, right through me, it's doing fine. All I had is top the night.
While the remaining players join in as best they can, playing along, contributing whatever they can recall of the work in question, filling the gaps of memory with improvised variational material.
Well, it was liberating for the performers because they could try things out and do what they wanted to do, and nobody would tell them not to do anything. So they had an opportunity to try out and explore their own ideas.
Nonetheless, it is people who are capable of playing music in the ordinary way.
Well, not at all. These people may be visual artists, they may be people interested in theatre, they may be perfectly ordinary office workers or students or what have you. They're not necessarily trained in playing any instrument at all. Some of them would perform activities of one kind and another, not necessarily producing sound, because scratch music was really a composite of people making their own activities. So that some of these activities would involve playing conventional instruments like saxophones or flutes and this, that and the other. And other things would simply involve making motions with a hand or arranging a scarf or all kinds of activities which would not necessarily make sound. The only limitation was that it should be fairly low key so as to allow somebody who wanted to express a solo to be able to do it on top of several people playing scratch music.
So, allowing for the fact that we can't see what's going on, can we hear what goes on?
Well, yes, let's listen to a bit of this tape. Yes, we don't actually need to it as though it was a fully composed piece of music, because the essence of scratch music is that people are asked to write accompaniments. So each person writes accompaniments and plays these accompaniments, and everybody else plays their accompaniments together. So in fact, this whole body of sound that makes up a lot of people playing scratch music could be used as a background for somebody playing a solo. And in fact, we can go on talking.
What on earth was that?
Well, of course. I mean, confusion is very useful. I don't mean that it's the total picture. You remain confused forever. So there's a humility in being confused. Well, it's suspended knowing. For as long as it lasted, you couldn't know.
The problem of order and cohesion was always one which the Scratch Orchestra was engaged with, but it never really solved that problem. They wanted to get rid of rhetoric and control and single focus on the one hand, but the danger of getting rid of all those things is that then you're completely anarchic, and if you have no direction or discipline at all, then it tends to become self-indulgent. As far as listeners were concerned, I don't think we ever really considered the listener as an independent entity. There was no concession made for the audience at all, no. The idea of the audience was somehow a kind of commercial invention which went with traditional concert hall music or with commercial rock music, and that it was really a kind of consumerism that we were trying to get right away from.
There needs to be much more structure, I suppose, and also I think there should have been more instructions generally known and accepted. In other words, too much was left up to chance, but given the kind of nature of the enterprise and the feeling that everybody was
given permission to do anything, basically, even disturbing others. I mean, that was obviously became an issue if you were, wanted to sort of play loud all the time. And for example, Sai used to bring his motorbike onto the performing arena and rev up. Some people got really pissed off with that. Again, it's a human problem. It's what do you do if somebody's doing something which you don't like? It's the crude, simple way is to to kill them. That's the obvious way. It's what people usually do. They kill them, shoot them, hang them, put a bomb on them. That's usually the human way of doing things. But there must be other ways of doing it, and I think that's what the Scratch were finding out about. If you find something intolerable, you feel you want to terminate it, but how do you terminate it? How do you do that? We actually created a further alienation from people. Instead of coming closer to them, we actually intensified our sense of alienation from the ordinary people, the people in the street, if you like.
There was a famous Scratch Orchestra tour. Concerts were organised in village halls. We found something that was near camp and then hired a village hall with the idea of obviously inviting the villagers to come to it. So there was one occasion in particular where we did get a large contingent from out of curiosity. What other reason could they have?
Nothing else to do.
Band of gypsies sort of turn up, basically. Same with a little concert in your village hall, booking the village hall, doing it. The one I remember in particular was a piece In fact, there's one of Keith's pieces called Restaurant Music, and this consisted of
people eating.
Most of the Scratch Orchestra around tables. They bought curry and chips for the local stall outside or whatever, and then Lou, Keith, and I were the band in the restaurant. We just played Moonlight in Vermont or something of that kind, and then people at the Scratch would then go up and dance, because the audience, what on earth is all this about? I mean, they stayed there. But what was interesting is that when we finished, they got up on the stage and sang to us. So that was one example where there was no antagonism whatsoever. There may have been incomprehension at first, I'm sure.
No, not necessarily antagonism.
But it was a nice spirit, actually. That was a good spirit. That was one of the better of the occasions I recall.
Yes.
For what it's worth.
So looking back on it, I think the two main points that came from them was one, to play to people who would not normally hear anything like that sort of music, certainly not live on a one-to-one basis. And secondly, it gave us a chance to become more convivial amongst ourselves, to get to know each other better, because we were, as it were, on a working holiday for a couple of weeks together on the same, living in the same sort of general accommodation.
No one really knew what was going on, I'd say, and I don't think Cornelius kind of minded, or it wasn't a problem, I don't think, as far as he was concerned. I think he had probably, perhaps at that time, too much trust in people's spontaneous capacity to organise. I'm sure he thought that it's better for people to work things out for themselves. He was very laissez-faire about it. That didn't really work. I mean, I think that more organisation probably made more people happy.
All I remember was that people were very, very unhappy. I mean, the reasons are very complicated, but I think there was a general feeling that things had to change, that we couldn't carry on playing scratch music and sort of like to amuse village audiences in the remoter parts of Wales and Anglesey.
In theory, we believe in integration and being gregarious. In practice, we are isolationists and parochialists. In theory, we reject the musical establishment. In practice, we ask for its support, Arts Council grants, BBC and TV. In theory, we wish to be an instrument of inspiration. In practice, we appear to many as a pessimistic symptom of a system in decay.
The question of how he was politicised, yes, I don't know how that happened. I mean, it may have happened through the effect that other people had on him, because I don't think it was in reaction to what was going on in the world, so to speak. And so, I mean, I think he was getting messages. I mean, he was getting instruction, you could almost say, from people who already had, let's say, a communist or similar type viewpoint, and he, to some extent, just adopted it. Okay, so you might say, well, anyone might do that. That's nothing so strange about that. But I suppose it was because it took him over, and he almost became a kind of exponent of the application of something like communism to everyday life, including everything to do with music.
A huge impact was Newcastle. The very fact that the state and media turned on us in such to us an unfair and unreasonable way. What happened was there was the first concert we did on the area outside Newcastle Civic Centre. About halfway through the concert, which was a normal sort of open-air Scratch Orchestra type event, we were doing Suite FA. And Suite FA basically said, be as obscene as you can until the authorities intervene. And Cornelius's version of that was sort of drawing, sort of outline Picasso-type drawings of naked women on toilet paper and a few rude words on toilet paper, silly things like that. But for the fact that a huge bunch of, quote, skinheads who had been out for the day on the moors came rampaging into the city centre, saw us, came over, milled around us, had a laugh, threw a few of the toilet rolls around, played on some of the instruments, all with us cooperating. There was no antagonism there whatsoever, apart from the fact that the civic centre authorities took an antagonistic attitude towards the skinheads. There was no problem whatsoever between the skinheads and the orchestra. But as a result of that, a whole lot of nonsense. They banned us from returning, and then it became a cause célèbre with the press. And then they had to manufacture an argument against us, which was to say that we were distributing pornography.
So the dealer concerts, that was the form that the concerts at the Tour of the Northeast took in 1971. It was almost like a critical point in the Scratch Orchestra for a number of reasons. One was that, first of all, it meant that all the concert proposals got used up at once. Secondly, it was like taking the idea of simultaneous music making to its extreme conclusion. And thirdly, it was the content of some of these like individual proposals that the authorities took exception to. So in all these ways it provoked a lot of soul searching. And then we wrote an opera.
If £200 public money was spent on this, it went down the drain. I will say that when I asked them to stop and sweep up, they did so quietly. The city architect has written to the association banning the orchestra second because the blatant obscenity both spoken and displayed was intolerable, particularly where children were present. The deputy city architect said, "We're not setting ourselves up as arbiters of what is modern music, but this kind of thing can only appeal to a tiny minority."
It was about the Tour of the Northeast. It was about the Scratch Orchestra itself touring the Northeast. So it also deals with the like political clash and what we were studying at the time, which was Mao Zedong thought was included.
In the world today, all culture, all literature and art belong to definite classes and are geared to definite political lines. This is a fact.
The communists, but in particular Keith Rowe, took advantage of that to depict the state as being a repressive organ. Here you have the capitalist state, the bourgeois state, preventing us from doing what we wanted to do. And so they use that as a kind of as a conduit into more general political discussion.
Society, art and culture, wittingly or unwittingly, is used against one class for another class.
Taking off our apathy.
The avant-garde period, consisting of successive avant-gardes, is not the latest, but the last chapter in the history of bourgeois music. The bourgeois class audience turns away from the contemporary musical expression of its death agony, and contemporary bourgeois music becomes the concern of a tiny clique taking a morbid interest in the process of decay. I must avoid giving the impression that this tiny clique of the avant-garde has its own kind of purity and honesty in representing the collapse of imperialism and of bourgeois values in general. No, imperialism is rotten to the core, and so is its culture. However, the ruling classes, the big businessmen, the politicians, the media controllers, etc., don't just turn away to groan and expire gracefully. They fight to stave off their collapse, and in this fight they use all the means at their disposal: economic, military, political, cultural, ideological. The aim of the establishment is to use ideas not as a liberating force for clarification and enlightenment and the releasing of people's initiative, but as an enslaving force for confusion and deception and the perversion of talent. In this way, they hope to stave off collapse.
Well, he was always interested in Chinese philosophy, culture, and language. From there, perhaps it wasn't such a great leap to go into, to contemporary China and to Mao. I mean, Mao, like Confucius, was an authority who was wielding power over and on behalf of the people. So this idea of the benign authority serving the people and leading the people was something which Confucius did, and this was the modern version.
The Scratch Orchestra was always very much against music art as simply entertainment.
It is incorrect to say music is a world of its own. It is used to serve the ruling class and hold the subject classes down ideologically.
See, when the idea of developing music and culture to serve the people became part of the consciousness of the orchestra, this made sense. That this was a genuine concern. Couldn't be ignored. The question of for whom couldn't be brushed aside.
Well, I think it was on the basis of his application of a philosophy through which he was trying to understand the world and how it worked, which in this case was Marxism. He found this to be a viable tool in which to make sense of the world, and he followed it through. And one of the conclusions, amongst many that he made, was that avant-garde music was a reactionary weight. It was neglecting many of the most important aspects of human commerce, of communication, of working together, of understanding each other, and of course the whole question of class.
What, you mean music? Ever since music began, and it sort of manifested itself in so many different ways all over the world, etc., 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 that in all these cases it's been used to serve the ruling class. I kind of can't quite believe it.
Cornelius went further. It wasn't just that it was irrelevant, he said it was actually harmful.
When you start looking at society, you find that many, many things which seemed to you up to that point not to serve anybody's interests in particular, will now be shown to serve the interests of the ruling class. I think that's one of the main points of Marxism, where if you accept that viewpoint, you are indeed a Marxist, but if you don't accept that viewpoint, then you're a wishy-washy liberal.
To take the music to do more concerts, but they had to have political content. The pieces had to be political, and that they had to always be, either before they began or afterwards, discussion about the politics. And they were to really promote the left wing, in those days, Maoist politics. That's what they were supposed to be for.
We played on what was called the Spielstrasse, Play Street, which was effectively a street, or at least a long line of events going on during the Olympic Games in Munich. And the other week we went to a village in the Tyrol called Hall. Revolutionary songs were sung in the village square. But I mean, there were experimental pieces done in the church. So we did, for example, Terry Riley's In C, we did paragraph 7 of the Great Learning, we did other experimental pieces. So the fact that people were doing revolutionary songs as well just basically indicates where the Scratch Orchestra was at that time, if you like.
This is Richard Oscar. Feldman and Cage were very upset at the performance of Burdock's. To begin with, they were upset at the inclusion of the folk songs. I explained that this was in the last spoke, one of the last spokes in which there was number 7. Cage said that should be 7 sounds. I said that there was nothing on the score to indicate that. And Cage, Feldman and Tudor went through the score trying to find an interpretation for this number 7. They also both said that there was no intensity that should be in Wolf's pieces, that the New York performances, this was Cage said, the New York performance is very beautiful and our performance is very bad. They also were upset at Core's speech in German when I said I didn't understand German, and they explained that he attacked Feldman and Wolf's ivory tower approach. They seemed to think that the performance was a kind of pastiche avant-garde, you know. Pastiche, sorry, did I? He thought it was not in the spirit of Wolf. They didn't like any part of it at all? They seemed to dislike the very kind of relaxed performance. The whole thing they thought was...
Some people like that though. You know what some people say?
Shut up, Birgit. I explained that perhaps some of the people weren't into the piece because of the transition in the orchestra, the ideological differences, etc. At this, Cage said he'd really like to hear some real Maoist music, and I said come along to the opera. They were very upset. Great, thanks a lot.
Yes, some ladies suggested that we should have made this piece much more ridiculous. You know, as we disagreed with the piece, you know, a lot of people said it was shit to do it. You know, so they called it bollocks instead of burdocks.
Me?
The Scratch Orchestra had weekly meetings, and these weekly meetings started up again after a visit to Munich in Austria. Probably the differences became more pronounced in those meetings, which are effectively meetings in which debate happened rather than musical actions were taken.
What happened to me is during it I just sort of broke down into tears, had to leave.
I think people probably felt it was difficult to operate, because as I said earlier, that there was a sort of, there's sometimes a sort of feeling that whatever you did, there was a good chance that you'd get it wrong, or at least not everybody would be convinced, especially if they appeared to be taking sort of what seemed to be quite a purist attitude towards music making. And I think probably the composers within the Scratch Orchestra either sort of withdrew or sort of fell silent for a bit.
For the first time it was really divided, and there was a lot of bitterness. Relationships which had grown and sort of cemented were broken. I mean, there was a lot of bad feeling of bitterness. People felt sort of betrayed. I think that was it. It was the harm it did to human relationships between people in the orchestra.
We had joined together over these years in a very meaningful way to create the music theatre, whatever you want to call it. And it felt like it was coming to an end. And it was sort of, there was a great feeling of loss about to happen.
The contradiction between being an experimental musician and being a revolutionary worker in the field of politics. It just didn't seem to have enough in common to hold together.
They were always denouncing everything and everybody, and any idea of human nature was something they really hated. But more specific than a class war, you know.
A war against imperialism.
Oh yes. And armed overthrow.
a lot of this, business with Cornelius is uncomfortable. I mean, putting it very mildly, it's upsetting, it's distressing, it's kind of, oh my God, Well, the thing I'm distressed about is his anger, and if not hatred, and his feeling of disgust and despair and despising of people, of the bourgeoisie, as if they are the kind of root of all evil. Because insofar as I'm a member of the bourgeoisie, how would that make me feel? It would just make me feel that I was somehow a terrible person, someone who'd kind of spent his whole life smashing up other people or something, and I don't feel that. And I would like not to feel that it was the truth. And so therefore, if the bourgeoisie are not as bad as that, then why is he painting them so badly? What's in him that he wants to do it? Why has he got this resentment? What's gone wrong? You sort of think, crikey.
Would have just said, well, if that's what you want to do, if you think that's of benefit to maybe he probably would have said, well, maybe it's some kind of therapy for you, or do you need this, or what are you doing it for? If we'd wanted him to say something about it, but he said that there's more important things to do than that. People are dying, and you're writing symphonies or whatever. I mean, he'd say, are you happy with that? No, I'm not happy with it. No, I'm not. No, I'm not.
I remained apolitical. So, since Cornelius didn't want to have anything to do with people who were apolitical or non-political or even anti-political, his friends had to go. But I think that's what surprised me, because I didn't know that politics, it was my first and probably only experience of politics ending a friendship.
Failure exists in relation to goals. Nature has no goals, and so can't fail. Humans have goals, and so they have to fail. Often the wonderful configurations produced by failure reveal the pettiness of the goals. Of course, we have to go on striving for success. Otherwise, we could not genuinely fail. If Buster Keaton wasn't genuinely trying to put up his house, it wouldn't be funny when it falls down on him. Enough.
I like to meet people and have people, say here now or subsequent meetings, who are from political organisations, shop stewards, who are actually working in factories, and who are in contact with the workers all the time, which we're not, and to talk to them about art, about music.
That's what we should do.
That's what I want to do.
That's what's important. You see, it's the workers who've got to decide their ideology, because they've got to actually enact them.
In that sense, we're going to say that some music's political, some music isn't. I think the music we have is political. Can be, we've already got the material. We've got all the material.
To play it in a political context, not to change
it's the context we have to find now.
Yeah.
It's how to do it. We've got the material.
Thank you.